Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with your host, Dr. Tony Huang. Today, I'm with a special guest, Kathleen. Could you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm so excited to be on your podcast today. I'm Kathleen Walch. I am the Director of AI Engagement at Learning at Project Management Institute, PMI.
So I've heard so much about Project Management Institute. Can you describe what it is that you guys do?
Sure. So Project Management Institute has been around for decades now. They're most known for the PMP, which is a certification for project management professionals. But I actually came on board from an acquisition. So PMI earlier in 2024, I almost said earlier this year, but we are in a new year. So in 2024, around September, they acquired my company, which is called Cognilytica. We're an AI-focused research advisory and education firm. And specifically, what we did was we developed a methodology for running and managing AI projects called CPMAI. So it goes very nicely into the portfolio of certifications that PMI offers.
So in your journey of project management, what were some of the trends that you saw? What were the hot topics in the industry?
It's interesting because when we talk about project management and project professionals, which is what we like to call it at PMI, we have traditional project managers who are tasked with, either doing predictive projects. So you can think about like construction projects or IT projects as well, right? It can be in more of an agile way. But then we have these project adjacent folks. So they might not identify as a project manager. Maybe they're a data scientist, or they, are in IT. They're a software developer or software engineer, and they're being tasked with running and managing AI projects. And that's really where Cognilytica played. And now where we're moving into with our role at PMI, so that it's people that may not identify as a project manager, but need to run and manage AI projects. And now they need a methodology for running it, and they need this step-by-step approach. And that's really where I've seen this transition with project professionals in the past few years.
So I'm curious as to why someone would want a certification. Is it for a specific role, or are they trying to achieve something? Who would get that type of certification?
The CPMAI certification in
Mm-hmm.
particular. Yeah, so PMI, we have gold standard certification. So a PMP, you need a number of different, a number of years of experience within a project management role. There's a lot of criteria for that. And CPMAI is moving towards a gold standard certification. But the whole reason that it came about originally was at Cognilytica, we were an AI-focused analyst firm, like a Gartner or a Forrester. And so we went and we looked at the industry, and we started back in 2017. So this is well before I say Gen AI made AI hot for everybody. Yes, of course, there was AI, right? And we were doing a lot of different things with it. But back then in 2017, there was a lot of discussion around, well, is this AI? Is this not AI? What do I do? Are we running it like a software development project? What are we doing? And we said, no, you need to run it like a data project. Well, if you're running it like a data project, you need a data-centric methodology. And so we looked out there because the organizations that we were working with, so actually we worked with a large bank and a large government institution. I'm based in the DC region, so lots of different government agencies around here, and lots of them looking to embrace AI. And they said, how do we go about doing this? Like, I understand that you're looking at the market, but how do we go about doing this? And so we looked out there and we really didn't see anything. There was CRISP DM, which was really around data mining, and that was developed in 1999, never iterated on. And so it wasn't really agile and iterative, and it also didn't have those specific AI elements that it needed. So with them, we helped, say, okay, what do we need to have this AI project success? And so we developed CPMAI methodology, which is 6 different phases that you go through. And we wanted it to be right in a logical order, because people go, well, what do I start with, right? Do I start with business understanding, figuring out what problem I'm trying to solve? Or do I start with the data? Because if you're telling me that this is a data project, maybe I just start with the data and I'm just going to plow forward. And we go, hold on. You need to start with your business understanding, because if you're not actually solving a real problem, don't move forward. It doesn't matter what data you have. And also make sure that AI is the right solution to that problem. A lot of people, for a number of different reasons, they feel pressure in the market. It's this idea of FOMO. They think their competition's doing it. They're getting driven from senior management to move forward, and they just want to move forward and do AI. And it's like, what does doing AI even mean? So it's like, let's take a step back. Let's say, what problem are we trying to solve? Figure out if it needs to be AI. And if it does, then we say, well, what pattern of AI do we need to do? Because that was something else that we had pioneered. There's, despite AI being around, and the term was officially coined in 1956, there's no commonly accepted definition of AI. So when you say, well, I need to do an AI project, what does that actually mean, right? I could be thinking about an autonomous vehicle, or I could be thinking about a predictive maintenance solution. I could be thinking about a conversational system with an AI chatbot or an LLM. All of these are different applications, are going to require different data sets, different amounts of data, maybe internal versus external. They're going to, if you're building it from scratch, require different algorithms. The time to ROI is going to be different. So we said, why don't we talk one level deeper and say, what problem are we trying to solve? And that's where the 7 patterns came into play. So that's hyper personalization, where we're treating each individual as an individual. And so this can, obviously, it's a marketer's dream, right? We think about, how do I get the right message to the right person at the right time? But we've seen a lot now with hyper personalized education or healthcare. How do I treat people, individually, or finance, right? Just because you have the same credit score as someone doesn't mean you have the same spending habits or the same salaries that you make, or, the same goals for saving for retirement. And then we have our conversational. So that's humans and machines talking to each other in the language of humans. So we think about AI chatbots, large language models fall into play here. Then we have predictive analytics. So this is taking past or current data to help humans make better decisions. We have our patterns. So that's, AI is able to look at lots of data really quickly and find patterns or spot outliers. Then we have our autonomous pattern. So that really is one of the hardest patterns, right? That's around autonomous software or autonomous hardware. So whenever I think of autonomous, I always think of autonomous vehicles, because that is eventually my dream. I know that we're far away from there, but it's like, I don't like driving. Yes, there's other things I can do right now, right? I can get Ubers and Lyfts and cabs and whatever. But so, how do we reimagine that? And then goal-driven systems. So this is really around reinforcement learning and optimization. And so we said, why don't we break it down into the 7 patterns of AI? And back in February of 2020, right before the whole world shut down, I went to Paris to present to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And they've adopted the 7 patterns as their definition of AI, which is now in the EU AI Act. So this is now PMI's definition of AI since they acquired Cognilytica. So that's really, how we're trying to push forward and say, let's talk about what pattern we're trying to solve. Let's make sure we're solving a real problem. And then we can move forward with our AI project.
So, how do you feel like the different governments in the world reacting to AI? There's like the European Union has their own set of rules, the U.S. has their own set of rules, China has their own rules. Like, what are the big differences between like these big superpowers?
That's such an interesting question, because actually we've done some research on that, right? We said, AI is now so important. Countries are having country level strategies on AI. And what does that mean, right? And what does a strategy mean? Organizations are having this and countries are having this. And so what we have discovered is that most countries, including the US, have this wait and see approach when it comes to technology. And there's benefits to that, because I always like to compare this to cell phone usage, where back in the 80s, there weren't many people that had cell phones. It was looked as a status symbol, right? I didn't really talk in the car. And if I did, there was not that many people on the road that were doing this, that the chances of those distracted drivers was pretty minimal. Then we think about the 90s, right? And then the 2000s, and now today, where pretty much everybody has. Well, now you make sure that we have, safe drivers and non-distracted drivers. Well, if we had been, proactive to that and said, well, we're just going to put these laws in place, people figure out how to skirt around that, right? So we need to see how the technology is being used. We need to see some of the pitfalls with that. And then we put the laws and regulations in place. The European Union is taking a much different approach, where they are saying, we're getting in front of this. We're going to be really proactive. So they have GDPR, which is around data, right? And data protection and data privacy. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, now they passed the EU AI Act. So they are, regulating AI at a level that other countries and regions, because European Union is a whole region, aren't. There's benefits to that, because then it helps people kind of be put within these guardrails and say, okay, How can we use this? But then there's, opponents say that this can stifle innovation and that companies may not be looking to do business in the EU or be building outside so that they don't need to be working within those confines.
And additionally, like, we had the inauguration of the new administration. Do you see any like big changes that are about to happen from the previous administration to this new one?
It's going to be a wait and see. But what I will say is that in the previous Trump administration, he was actually very positive on AI and made a lot of AI investment. I know he's made some big announcements now with AI infrastructure, like 500 billion, but I don't know. It was something crazy, right? And so he has all these initiatives. He was very pro AI, and I'm hopeful that he will be pro AI in this new administration. Have to see where the world goes, right? When, last time he was president, we didn't have ChatGPT. Like the world's changed, AI has changed. He also has a really big Silicon Valley presence now, large tech that's within his cabinet and circle of influence. So I'm interested to see where things go.
The hot thing right now is generative AI. And a lot of corporations are adopting Gen AI. So in your point, from your like point of view, how's like PMI integrating Gen AI to assist corporations?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And Gen AI is such a hot topic. So, one thing that I really am excited to see is that PMI has a tool called Infinity, and it was produced back in 2024. And it's a generative AI assistant to use to use across project based work. And so, it's powered with GPT 4.0 for improved efficiency and accuracy to response time. And it's interesting to see that, project managers, project professionals, when we talk about Gen AI, as I had said earlier, the term was officially coined in 1956, AI, the term artificial intelligence. Yet it feels like the oldest, newest technology. And it's been around for decades. We've gone through two previous AI winters, which is a period of decline in investment, decline in, adoption by large organizations. Yes, researchers were always out there. But, even talking to people, AI used to be considered a dirty word, even, back in the day. But now we're in our what we call an AI spring, and we're seeing this big resurgence. Gen AI has put AI into the hands of everybody. So I like to call this augmented intelligence, where you're not replacing the human, but helping them do their job better. And I've seen so many efficiencies where people are using AI and it's helping them in a variety of different ways. And so at PMI, we see, well, how can it help that project professional, right? And so we've done some reports at PMI, and the research that we've conducted finds that project professionals who are high adopters of Gen AI are more productive, they're better at problem solving, and they're also more effective at their job. So how can they take some of those tasks that were repetitive or menial or not really what you're hired to do? I mean, data entry, we always talk about, but like meeting minutes, for example, this is something that project professionals have to do and nobody likes to do it. It can take away from maybe their paying attention in meetings. Well, now AI is able to do a pretty good job at meeting minutes. Yes, we always say keep a human in the loop. The human's going to have to look at it and say, is this task assigned to the right person? Is this what was said in the meeting? But it saves a lot of time, and maybe the human only needs to look at it for 5 minutes rather than putting it together for 30. Or how can it help with email communication? And so if you need to write emails across, to different stakeholders and different, sponsors of your project, or if you're going to, send out a recap to executives, now you can use AI to help with that and generate that, or with project risk assessments, or with your project charter. We're seeing AI used in a number of different ways. And PMI has put together a lot of different learning courses. The most recent course that they put out was practical applications of AI. So it goes through different AI workflows. How can I use AI to help me create PowerPoint slides, translate that into a different language, and then use an AI avatar to present that? I mean, like, that's an incredible workflow. You can't do that without AI. So I've seen a lot of potential with generative AI, how people are now thinking about and using and adopting this. But we do need to make sure that we're solving real problems and that that ROI, that return on investment, because I always say the ROI is money, time, and resources. So do you have access? How much does the different tools cost that you're using for your different workflows? Make sure that it's providing a positive return and that you're using Gen AI the way that it was meant to be used. Because when I go back to those 7 patterns of AI, right, it's not good at every single pattern. So understand at that kind of fundamental level what it is good for, what it's not good for, and then use it appropriately.
So I know that a lot of companies right now they're in like the POC stage where like either that or like they're at the left side of the bell curve in terms of AI adoption. And they're just kind of like curious and trying it out. And right now I haven't seen a lot of companies actually like productionalize their Gen AI products. And of the ones that actually did, usually I've seen like negative PR because like the chatbot was like biased or like it spewed out like misinformation. In your opinion, like where do you think people are like where do you think like the companies are right now in terms of their AI journey? Do you think the majority of them are on like the left side of the bell curve for like adoption, and there might be some companies on the right side that are that have already taken that into commercialization and they're putting it into use and getting ROI, or like where is everybody in their journey?
I think you're exactly right. I think most people are on the left side of the bell curve and they're figuring it out. And maybe there's certain pockets or, one application, one use case that they're really just moving forward with. When I present too, sometimes we talk about common reasons why AI projects fail. And we always like to have rip from the headlines. And so it's funny you bring this up, right? Because chatbots, people get so excited about chatbots because they think that it can save time or money or whatever, right? Have this always on workforce. But that's why I always go back to, well, what problem are you trying to solve? So US Postal Service actually did chatbots right back in the day. This is like an old use case. And I love to bring it up because we always say think big, start small, and iterate often. So what they did is they said, what is the number one question that we get asked? It was around the holidays and they wanted to reduce call center volume. So they knew what they were trying to measure. They knew that their return on investment would be to reduce call center volume because they were getting a lot of calls and it was overwhelming all of the agents. Well, it's track a package. So they said, we're going to have a chatbot answer just that one question. We don't need it to answer any other questions. We're going to make sure that it answers that correctly. We're going to monitor that, right? And we can measure it, see what the return is, measure the reduction in call center volume if there was, if there wasn't. And they said, okay, this actually worked great, did exactly what we wanted. Now let's move to the next most frequently asked question, and then the next and the next. So we say, think big, start small, and iterate often. Other examples that I've seen where they're failing, right? And that's not the side that you want to be on, is Air Canada, where they decided to put a chatbot onto their website. And somebody went and said, okay, I have a bereavement question, typed it into the chat. The chatbot responded. They printed out the screenshot of it, and then they went to go, get a refund for their bereavement flight. And Air Canada said, that's not our policy. And he said, that's what your chatbot told me on your website. And they said, oh, yeah, that's not authoritative. Well, he took him to small claims court and Air Canada lost. So you don't want to be on that receiving end. And so maybe Air Canada should have said, what are people really coming to use chatbots for? Maybe it's just to check a flight status or, it's things day of. It doesn't need to answer 10,000 different questions in 5 different languages. And, you know, that's biting off more than you can chew, right? That's not iterating often and starting small. That's thinking big and going big and then having all these problems. And so we need to say, AI is not set it and forget it. You can't just put a chatbot out there. New York City also got into a lot of trouble with this. There was a Chevrolet dealership that got into trouble with this. There's so many examples where these chatbots don't perform as expected because they're taking on way more than they should all at once.
Yeah, I remembered that reading about that article, with the Canadian Tribunal, that was a big case. And that caused a lot of people to have heartburn about publicly facing chatbots. I also realized that like other companies are putting like publicly facing chatbots out right now. Like there's like Amazon, if you ever go shopping on Amazon, they have a thing called Rufus or something like that on there. I found out that you can actually get Rufus to write like Python code for you if you just prompt it correctly. So
Right.
so basically, I'm using Amazon's Rufus to like do the coding for me. And it's free. So like people need to be really careful when they build publicly facing chatbots because like right now there are safeguards to help mitigate a lot of problems. But you obviously, with someone who has a lot of time on their hand, you can break that chatbot. So what I'm trying to say is that be really careful when you're building your publicly facing chatbots for your company because you do not want a bad PR, kind of like Air Canada or gosh, what was another one?
Well, New York
Oh,
City, they put a
oh yeah,
chatbot out and it started giving illegal information. It was telling landlords they could discriminate. And I was like, that's not what you wanted.
yeah. There was a really famous case with there was like two lawyers that submitted like ChatGPT derived cases to a judge, and it was like obviously the cases were fake,
Well, that
but
was hallucination issues.
yeah,
Yeah,
right,
where they
right.
put it in to write their, yeah, their briefs or whatever, and then it came up with cases that didn't actually exist and they cited them as references. That's where I say you got to keep the human in the loop too. And so when we are using generative AI, especially if we are using it as that augmented intelligence tool, right? It's not used to replace the human. This is where critical thinking skills, and this is what PMI calls power skills, comes into play, one of which is critical thinking. And so when we think about using Gen AI, right, I always say that it's the two sides. So how do you use Gen AI to help you with power skills? And how do your power skills help with generative AI? So communication, for example, where you talked about, well, get better at prompting, and then you can kind of hack your way into getting different answers. But also, if you use this for the positive and you say, I'm going to get better at prompting. I'm going to learn prompt patterns and I'm going to figure out which pattern is best for my situation. And we always say, prompting should not be proprietary. Your prompts should be shared freely, especially with people in your community, people at your organization, people within your group, so that you can all get better collectively together. Because what prompt worked 3 months ago may not work today, right? These large language models are constantly learning and iterating themselves, and so you need to refine your prompt over time. So we always say share those prompts and keep practicing and build that community internally. You can build that network wherever, right? PMI has put out a really great prompt engineering best practices course, and we have a community there that can help with different prompts, and those are specific towards that project professional community. But internally, I always recommend that people have this as well. Get those cohorts together, get those groups, share those different prompts, and on the different platforms as well, because you may not be, specific to one platform. Maybe you're using a number of different ones.
So in your like from your point of view of all of like the clients that you guys have helped out, like which one had like the best use case for Gen AI? Yeah, like the greatest like ROI story that you can like disclose.
Wow. I mean, that's so tough because we didn't do implementation, right? We taught you how to follow a step-by-step approach. I love AI chatbots, even though I know that we've given a lot of different examples as to how they can fail. We're actually in the middle of a use case series. I have a podcast as well, so I love fellow podcasters, and it's called AI Today, and we're in the middle of a podcast series on use cases in different industries because people are so into LLMs right now, generative AI, what it can do, but it's just one, right? It's just, there's other patterns of AI. And so we've seen predictive maintenance come across in a lot of different industries. And that's one thing that I've seen a lot of benefit from. So when you think about fleets of vehicles, and so who has fleets of vehicles? Well, or equipment that could potentially fail. So we think about manufacturing, we think about construction, we think about government, right? Especially when it comes to local government or state government, federal government has some vehicles as well. How do we get we don't need to be doing maintenance on them as much as we necessarily think we do. And so you think, okay, well, cars, who cares? But like, what about if we have planes or we have, really expensive equipment, or even if, in mining, right? You're going into some treacherous environments, those vehicles are. Do they need to be maintained every single time that they go down deep into a mine? Or with the help of predictive maintenance, you can better predict when that part's going to fail. This also helps with supply chain, which sometimes is a bigger issue than others, but to make sure that you always have that part on hand so you don't have that downed equipment time, which can impact your bottom line.
That's so cool. I always like to hear what the use cases are because I mean right now the only use cases I'm hearing are like, you know, implementing like a chatbot here or like, or like something that's off the shelf. I haven't heard any like cool like use cases that are like the stuff that you've said. So it's always nice to see like what like where people are finding value in deploying Gen AI tools other than just your basic like chatbot or your these very your chat GPTs or something like that. So from your point of view, where is the industry headed towards now that like Gen AI is becoming more and more ubiquitous, right? So like a lot of companies are investing like billions and billions of dollars into their initiatives. There's like big pushes from the government now for it. There's mandates here and there. Like where are we headed towards in 2025? Granted, right now it's January 2020, 22nd. Like what's going to happen in say like the middle of the year?
Wow. That's so hard. You can't predict what's going to happen with AI in the middle of the year. It's hard to predict even like a month out sometimes. But a big push that I see for 2025, a big kind of prediction is agentic AI. And so what does that mean? And how do we evolve? And I think that one thing that makes this hard is it moves so fast. AI is moving so fast. Every single day there's a different tool that comes out that can help you be more efficient in, one aspect of your job or a workflow or whatever it is. So you need to kind of cut through that noise and say, well, how can it help me, right? Because another reason that I see AI projects fail is that there's a vendor mismatch. And so a lot of organizations need to, for whatever reason, their X vendor, insert whatever that vendor is. And so you need to use the tools and technologies that that vendor puts out. Well, they may have really, really great tools, but they're evolving and changing, right? Because that's what AI does. And also, they might not be the best solution to your problem. So that's why we always have to come back to what problem are we trying to solve? But in 2025, agentic AI is going to be a really hot topic. And I know that even at PMI, with PMI Infinity, we're moving towards agentic AI.
Yeah, I remembered in like late 2023, like the hot thing was at the time they didn't come up with this term, but it was like question answer query, which is like RAG now. So like RAG was like the big hot thing late 2023, and then like late 2024 last year, the big thing that came up was agentic. So I think we're gonna see a big push for that like this year. And yeah, I'm really curious as to like where that's gonna head because there's just like better and better chips coming out of these manufacturers like AMD, Intel, Nvidia, obviously that are going to help accelerate, the availability of Gen AI to the masses. There's like at CES, I think Nvidia released like this thing called Digits, which is like a supercomputer that for home use. So we're seeing a lot of things coming out of industry and being more and more affordable for like the average Joe. I think that's what's going to happen is the widespread availability of Gen AI tooling equipment. There's fierce competition that's going to be coming our way from like our geopolitical rivals. That's going to push like the innovation of like hardware and software, which will benefit everybody. And I think a big thing that's gonna I mean the big thing that I'm watching right now is the government mandates. That's gonna really dictate like how free we are to like build AI systems, or if it kind of like becomes really stringent because people are fearful of like AI misinformation or AI biases or something like that. Curious to get your thoughts on like where everything is gonna be in terms of like regulation. Like I right now it's I even I can't even predict what's going on.
I know. If I had my crystal ball, right? It's interesting that you brought that up too, because I was delivering a master class about a week ago in Dubai at a project management conference, and it was on AI fundamentals. And somebody brought up, they said, now that Meta is no longer going to be fact checking, what does this mean? And for a long time, I've always said you can no longer believe what you see, what you hear, and what you read. That becomes really scary because then who do you trust? Who is that authoritative truth, right? And that source of truth when you're looking to get information. Adversarial attacks, we've seen that, AI is getting so good at impersonating people. And as a podcaster, now your voice is out there. So it's pretty easy. You don't need that much audio to dupe you, right? And even just with an avatar, how I had talked earlier about that workflow where you're able to, clone yourself and have you talk in multiple different languages. If you have a dispersed team and maybe English isn't their first language and you'd like to have it speak in their native language, is it going to be 100%? No, but it's good enough. Do they know that it's you? Well, there's cues that they can see. Maybe if you have a microphone in front of you, usually, and the microphone is removed, or depending on if you're wearing the same clothes every single time, right? These are some, giveaways, but it's really hard to detect. And actually, even last year, I was at South by Southwest, and they had one of I'm an innovation awards judge, have been for a number of years, and it's always so fascinating to see the different technology that's coming out. And so they were having, a detector to say, is this real or not? Is this real audio or not real audio? Especially it was around Joe Biden. I think that was around when there was a robocall that went out that was telling people not
Yeah,
to vote.
yeah, that occurred in the New England area, and what they used was they used 11 labs to do that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
because of that, there was a new FCC like rule that says that no outbound calls can be robocalls anymore. And obviously the I think the person got fined like 6 million or something like that.
They could have, but that's a drop in the bucket,
Yeah.
honestly, when it comes to AI. And again, this is where laws and regulations come into play, because if they had put that out, then they would have just skirted around that issue, right? So if you can't have robocalls that go out, well, what else can you have that go out? Can you have Facebook messages that go out? Can you have something else that goes out, right? And this is where it becomes so difficult to manage that, because criminals will be criminals and bad people, bad actors will continue to try and do bad things. And so how do you regulate that, and how do you get in front of that? So yeah, of course, because there's also examples where I'm in Maryland, and this was earlier in 2024. A criminal, right, had called up an elderly, like grandparents, in the middle of the night, faked their granddaughter's voice, said she was in trouble, they needed to send money right away, she was in jail, who knows, right? They woke them up in the middle of the night. They were, just coming out of sleep. They weren't thinking 100% straight. Now they hear their granddaughter who's like crying on the phone. They're getting worked up about this, and they just went and sent the money, and it was a criminal. This is going to continue to happen. And we think about, well, what does that mean for schools, right? Or what does that mean? How do you keep your children safe if somebody's calling up the school and pretending to be a parent and having the child be released and it's not, who knows what'll happen. And so this is the scary stuff that we need to constantly be thinking about, and really hard to manage and regulate.
Yeah, I do know that the baby boomer generation are being targeted right now for like social security scams that are Gen AI powered. And that's really sad because they can't, they're not like tech savvy enough to like kind of distinguish like authentic voice versus like a Gen AI voice. I mean, like you know, people within our age range, I mean, we grew up on like MySpace, Facebook, Instagram. So we're accustomed to like being able to identify like these fake generated videos and audios. But for the baby boomers, they haven't seen that kind of technology yet, and they're like most at risk of these scams, and that makes me sad. And additionally, I think I mean, like the thing that worries me the most of all of this is like the data poisoning and the model collapse that's about to happen in the future. So what that means is like language models right now are they were built on say literature, right? So you go out and you scrape all these literature, classical literatures, like I'll give you an example, like Amazon books, for instance. You kind of go out there and you scrape all of the books. Now you have language models that are producing like these Gen AI written books that are being published on Amazon. And so what you'll notice is that like in the future for like future language models, they will scrape the Gen AI produced books off of Amazon and then get trained off of that. Then you'll get like this thing called a model collapse where like the model just collapses upon itself because there's like no more original content that's being produced. That's like my biggest fear.
Yeah, that whole like collapse of creativity, or what does that mean? And now we're relying on Gen AI so much to write things for us. The other thing that when you talked about these Gen AI books, another example that I like to bring up is if people aren't fact checking, it can get into real big issues. And for foragers out there, which I dabble in it, but it scares me because I don't know all of the plant identification, right? You go into the forest and you can pick different plants. Well, mushrooms are really dangerous because they can kill you if you eat the wrong one. And there was a book about foraging for mushrooms, and it was written by Gen AI, and it ended up being inaccurate. Well, if you're out in the middle of the woods, you've probably bought a book because you don't have access to reliable internet. And so you want to look at the book and look at different pictures in the book and figure out what these mushrooms look like, because sometimes the difference between a poisonous mushroom and an edible mushroom are quite small. And if these books are not accurate, it's really scary. And how this is why I say you have to keep the humans in the loop. But who's checking these books if you're self-publishing?
Yeah, we're in it for like a brave new future because it's literally the Wild West right now. But I'm pretty happy that at least PMI is trying to do something about that. Then speaking of PMI, like you guys have some like hot stuff coming out of the pipeline. Can you like disclose some of the cool things you guys are developing?
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned, we have PMI Infinity, which is a free benefit to members. Not everybody knows that. So we're trying to get the word out about that. You can go to infinity.pmi.org and check that out. And if you're not a member, it's pretty cheap to become a member. So I encourage people to do that. But we also have the CPMAI certification. And that's what my company was acquired for. And so we're moving towards a gold standard certification, have gotten a lot of adoption. We had adoption before, obviously, the acquisition, but now with the acquisition, we're able to reach an entire new market, but also bring in those people that I said, were maybe project professional adjacent and didn't quite identify as a project manager or project professional. So that's interesting. We have our AI Today podcast, which is now a PMI podcast. I've been the host since 2017. I'm going to continue to be running that podcast. We publish weekly, and I encourage listeners to check out that podcast. Always love, to be on different podcasts and kind of share and collaborate with those communities. I obviously love podcasts. And we also have different e-learning courses that are coming out that are free for members or, quite cheap for non-members, quite affordable for non-members so that they can check that out. The next one that we have coming up is AI in construction and how that's being used. And we actually had a podcast on that, and I write for Forbes as well. So I'll talk about different use cases because, as you brought up earlier, that's what people want to know, like the art of the possible. They're like, this is great in theory, but how are people actually using this? And so they want to know within their industry, but then they want to know in other industries as well. And I always say, get out of that tunnel vision. Everybody thinks that their problem is unique. And guess what? It's not. So maybe you need to just take a step back and say, well, what are other people trying to do, right? I brought up the predictive maintenance example, which does not use an LLM, but uses one of the patterns of AI, right? Uses the predictive pattern. And so it's like, how do you take past or current data to help humans make better decisions? Well, that's being used in a number of different industries. Chatbots obviously are something that's super easy. Recognition, that's another pattern where we're making sense of unstructured data. So how do we make sense of unstructured data? What does that mean, right? Our organizations have 80+%, and quite frankly, it's probably way more than that now, is unstructured. So we think about, right, it's not in those nice schemas. And, I think about an Excel spreadsheet. It's like, how much data do you work with regularly that's in Excel spreadsheets, depending on what industry you're in, but most likely not a lot, right? Emails are unstructured, meeting minutes are unstructured data. So how do we make sense of all of that unstructured data? These are great use cases for AI. So I'm excited. PMI is really powering forward with AI with their investment of it. And so we think about AI from two sides. How do we use AI to help us do our jobs better? And we have a lot of answers to that, right? Infinity, the e-learnings that we have. And then how do we successfully run and manage AI projects? And that's what CPMAI is. So PMI really has that nice holistic view to help project professionals really succeed in this new AI era.
Yeah, I did remember the time in which people just discovered like video data was like an untapped data source. So like, an untapped like unstructured data source. So people came out with like convolutional neural networks that does like object tracking, and then now fast forward we have like self-driving cars like Tesla. So that's really, to me, that's really awesome that we're finally realizing that data is all around us, and we just have to kind of recognize like how to, like what they are, like how to tap into it, and then how to get value from it. So that's really exciting. So, if I wanted to learn more about like PMI, like how would I do that? Is there a way I can get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I encourage your listeners to go to pmi.org and check out everything we have going on. And please connect with me on LinkedIn, Kathleen Walch, Walch. I love to connect with different people from all over the world. And I also speak at a number of different events. So you can find me there as well. I always put where I'm coming up on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. And until next time, stay curious.